presentation columns, which covered all the slides are summarized in that. One was that PowerPoint slide on secretin and CCK. The third one was basically going through all the names and metabolism of the anabolic and catabolic reactions. That's 3. 4, I'm actually going to do again because we're going to use it today. And 5th would be diabetes, which I didn't do. Okay, so we're going to see the importance of this. There's going to be a carryover between this chapter and the next with blood glucose. So we're going to go ahead and this is the 4th of the 5 things in the chapter. Really nice chapter. So we'll go ahead and do this again. So we'll talk the idea of having hyperglycemia or just high blood sugar in general. Remembering that we have the pancreas and really the beta islet cells produce insulin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm not going to write it maybe the exact same way, but we're going to put it up here for a reason. But this was the 4th one. Again, for insulin, the first 2 things were the idea that we were going to increase glucose getting into cells. And, just to kind of do this. Because we'll actually put this. So the overall figure is we have, here's the insulin receptor. So again, partially a review. You don't need to know the specifics. If you look on the chapter, you see the different steps inside the cell of what insulin's doing. The bottom line is this. We have blood glucose out here. Glucose can't just diffuse through the cell. We all know that by now. It uses a transporter. But for most cells, these transporters are not active without insulin. And so what insulin does is it binds to its receptor, and through a bunch of second messengers, different systems, it basically inserts or activates these glucose transporters so glucose can enter the cell, which is what we needed to do to start getting it for energy. So right now we're just putting glucose entering the cell, and really that's all you have to know, but I want you to kind of conceptualize how insulin is doing that. And we'll see it's important for diabetes. It binds to its receptor, and then through a bunch of different mechanisms, activates and inserts the transporters for glucose, and glucose gets in. Now when we do that, of course, we're lowering blood glucose, and negative feedback then will start taking care of controlling into how much insulin. The second thing we put up that, because we all knew this before, the second thing it does is, we're going to break down glucose, multiple steps, to kind of summarize it, break it down into CO2 and make energy. That's why we actually ate the candy bar. That's why we needed glucose, to convert it to our usable energy. And this process is of glucose breakdown to get it, insulin promotes that as well. It activates some enzymes needed for that. So the summary number 2 was basically it increases, and we can kind of show their figure, but we're using slightly different words on some of this, and I added. Here they have it increases. This process is called oxidation of glucose, or breakdown of glucose, and so that's what it promotes too. And I'll put breakdown here. So it helps it get into cells, and it helps our ability to use it for energy. Pretty good guy. The last 3 things, and we're just going to put our own words, are when you have a lot of, it says fed state, when we have a lot of energy, that's when we can make things. And maybe making things was anabolic on that figure that we were showing this way. And so it's going to promote the storage of glycogen in the liver. It's going to promote fat synthesis and protein synthesis. But we're going to use our words and basically say it's going to basically promote making of glycogen, which is glycogenesis. It's going to promote the making of fat, which is lipogenesis. And the fifth one is it's going to promote, actually, so we'll do that way. We'll just put protein synthesis just like that. Okay? That's the 5 things that we care about that insulin does. You see, it affects all metabolism, not just getting sugar into cells, which is important.
The last 3 being anabolic?
What?
The last 3?
Last 3 are anabolic. We're going to make everything we can make. And we're going to revisit this when we do diabetes in a minute. But let's go ahead and finish the other side of the coin that we're going to use more today. So you have low blood sugar. Here they talk about being in a fasted state. Let's say, well, now remind us, just because blood sugar drops below this range, you're not automatically hypoglycemic. You just, are below the range would go up. If it gets to a certain level, it's called hypoglycemia. But we're talking low blood sugar. And it is the pancreas, it is the alpha islet cells, which will produce and secrete glucagon. Now, the main site of action of glucagon is the liver. It also goes to the skeletal muscle and, other places, but glucagon goes to the liver, and the liver is going to really be responsible for these 5 things. If you look at the PowerPoint and the handout from the book, it's got these things where it's got the muscle and the liver and fat and showing you all this stuff, and we're just summarizing it like this. So that's why you don't need to know that slide. So, okay, we're low blood sugar. We need it. We need to, and you can see some of the words there. It's time to break down the glycogen. Okay, that's stored in the liver. So it's glycogenolysis. That's going to help us bring glucose levels back up for the brain. So that's glycogenolysis. The next 2 things are that we want to have the other cells use fats and maybe even proteins for energy to save glucose for the brain. So the next 2 are going to be catabolic. We're going to break down proteins and we're going to break down fats. And so the words we used were, again, the order doesn't matter here on these, but lipolysis and proteolysis. Okay? Those were catabolic. You can tell by lysis. Actually, I guess these first 3 were catabolic. The last 2 are, we're going to make things. Okay? And both of those are on there under these last 2. And we're going to put it there. We're going to make glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, okay, which will be the breakdown of the other guys. And we're going to make ketones from fatty acids, which are emergency fuel for the brain. And that were those 2. So 4 and 5 were gluconeogenesis and ketogenesis. Okay? So this was what we did last time. Okay? That final thing. This is, number 4 sort of the 5 main things from that chapter. Any questions about that? Now, the last thing in the chapter, which is why it's sort of good on that, is we're going to talk about diabetes. Okay? We're talking about this chronic high blood sugar, not being able to basically bring it down. And there are 2 types. And, I have most of this basically summarized on the board, and maybe we'll even use this. So type 1 is basically, it's an autoimmune disease, so you inherit it, and it causes destruction of the beta islet cells. Some of this, again, even this, we might have reviewed in Chapter 4 way back at the beginning. We did a lot of this stuff. So the idea of that will be that you'll have, and I tried to sort of, correct it because people wording on things, sort of freak people out. Remember, when we're saying destruction, it's a progressive destruction. Okay, if you're losing beta islet cells, you're losing your ability to make insulin. And so, insulin levels are low to none, depending upon the destruction. So these patients are obviously dependent upon getting insulin. Okay? Now, for both these, if you kind of go into the next two bullet points, and we'll kind of use the figure, both of these, and this is important, because we see this idea of ketogenesis. Ketones basically can acidify the blood, and we call this ketoacidosis. That's the problem about making ketones. It's an emergency fuel. It can save your life, but it's acidic, and it can cause metabolic acidosis, ketoacidosis. Now you're like, okay, I can get that. It's going to happen if you're starving, but it's diabetes as well. Okay, if you have unregulated diabetes. The reason for this is that your body thinks you're starving, okay? You've got plenty of glucose, your high blood glucose, but if you're not getting into cells, your body thinks you don't have glucose. And so it's going to promote the formation of ketones. So unregulated diabetics can have, you can even smell in their breath too, can have ketones produced, and it will be acidosis, ketoacidosis.
What do ketones smell like?
I don't know. What do ketones smell like? Like acetone. Like what are some acetone things?
Like nail polish?
Yeah, like nail polish, right?
Or
Something
nail
like
polish
that.
removers?
Yeah. Anybody smell this out there? Okay, because there's nurses out there, people that work on it that actually know things. Okay, I haven't actually
It actually
smelled it.
smells like alcohol. It can smell like regular alcohol.
Okay, see, somebody actually knows. Thank you. Yeah, if you know answers when I'm like, I don't know, then you're like, yeah, it actually smells like that. Okay. So that's important. So remember that. Because, and if you, again, when you look at extra questions, I even have some question on that involves diabetes in that idea. So, but this is for both, okay? But I put it over here. So remember that point. And I'll talk about this key thing in a second, because it's just a way to visualize it. So, type 2, though. Okay, this is environmental for the most part. This is sort of it's an epidemic sort of in our country. And what's happening with this is it's not an autoimmune. It's not destruction of the pancreas or the beta islet cells. The receptors become less responsive to the insulin. So the receptors that are on your cells that are utilizing insulin, they're not responding to it anymore. So these basically become, it's basically the cells become insulin resistant. So if you think about this, and think about what why I really want to make low to no. Let's make sure we understand what we're saying here. Low to no insulin production. For these ones, it's actually going to be different. So if you have type 2 diabetes, most of the thing that causes this is actually obesity. So we talked about that fat produces leptin, and I said it produces all other kinds of things. It produces basically different hormones that literally desensitize cells to insulin. So these insulin receptors aren't going to work. Okay? Now in response, what do you think your body's going to do as far as insulin levels?
Too much glucose.
Okay, it's going to have too much glucose, and so what's it going to try to do? Correct it by doing what to insulin? Producing more. So there's a big difference, okay? Whereas type 1, you're going to have low to no insulin. Early stages like type 2, you actually have higher levels of insulin. Because your beta islet cells are saying, these aren't working very well, I'm going to try to make make it work, and so I'm going to produce more insulin. But your cells are not responding properly because they've been desensitized by all the things from fat and other factors as well. But really, it's obesity is the major cause of type 2 diabetes, and why it's an epidemic in a lot of parts of the world and this country. Not so much here. We're pretty slim and healthy here. But that's sort of the idea of that. And so, well, that's basically the idea. So for these early stages, these are not insulin dependent. As far as, and that's meaning as far as, receiving it, injections or whatever for these two. So these definitely need injections of insulin or however else we're going to do it. These don't. Eventually, if you don't treat this or you don't correct this, and your beta islet cells are throwing out insulin, eventually they stop working, and then those patients can become insulin dependent too. But at early stages, that's not the case, and it can be reversed. If you sort of, if you're getting signs of that, you have high blood sugar, and you'll see high insulin levels you can measure. Like get on a diet, exercise, and do all that. You can actually reverse a lot of the effects. But if it reaches a certain level where these cells have become destroyed, boom, you're on insulin again. And you can't replace until we start, using stem cells, etc. You can't replace the beta islet cells that you've lost. So you're going to become insulin dependent at that point. But these are environmental. If you exercise, I'll answer your question, you can actually get glucose in without insulin. Okay? That's why exercise, just for all of us, means that you don't have to have this, because insulin itself is a growth factor and feeds cancer and all these other things. So you don't want to make too much of any of these hormones. So by exercising, you actually get glucose in and maintain lower insulin levels. So for diabetics, clearly it's even more important because they don't either have insulin or it's not working. You use a different mechanism to get the glucose in, you're going to have less high blood sugars. Exercise is really important for diabetics as it is for all of us.
I was just wondering, with diabetes, it's only hyperglycemia, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's chronic high blood sugar for these two basic types of reasons. Either you've destroyed your type 1 is, that's why it's called juvenile, because this will occur early in life because it's genetic. You're destroying your own beta islet cells. This one is mostly environmental. It will happen later in people's lives, depending upon how fat you are as a kid, I guess. But and there's always genetic components to everything. Okay, so that aren't maybe the gene, but when you have if you have a predisposition of diabetes in your family, even from type 2, you basically can have a predisposition.
So type 1, even if it's in your genes, you can't avoid it, but type 2 is something that you said it's environmental, you can't control.
Yes.
So Freeman, I don't know how to phrase this. I had a really good friend of mine who was dancing. He just chose not to eat that night, went to sleep, and fell into a diabetic coma. He ended up passing away because of it. But he did not know he had diabetes. No one did. Is it possible for that to happen and have no signs whatsoever?
Well,
Or maybe you just don't know what signs and you don't get it checked out.
yeah, I think he had symptoms and you just didn't check it out. I mean, that's sort of, I can't imagine you wouldn't have, because diabetes itself is a chronic condition too. But of course, that could be hiding symptoms too, because if you got something which is chronic and you just kind of get used to living with it, and that time I seem to be urinating a lot, or what I mean, you're not going to necessarily know that you have it.
Okay.
You can be skinny too, right? And still have it.
Sure. And there's other factors besides, fat and the things that produce it that you can that can affect it. But as far as causing an epidemic, that's why type 2 have really risen in this country because of that.
What did you say about leptin again? I know we don't need to know it, but what is leptin? And how does
Well, you do have to know it.
Oh, I know. I mean, I know we have to know what leptin is, but
It's just I used it right now because when we were talking about leptin that inhibiting hunger, I was saying it's released by fat cells. So I'm saying fat not only releases leptin for controlling hunger, it releases dozens and dozens of other factors that have these other effects on the body.
and that's leptin is.
Leptin's on about here.
It's a hormone. Oh, I thought you said that also
No.
contributes to insulin not being.
Not leptin, but other things that the fat
Oh,
produces.
okay.
Besides leptin.
Okay.
Okay, here's the most important chapter. and we'll get through, well, we can get through all of it, there's no lab, but we'll get through as much as we can in the next hour. And then the idea of this, to finish this off too, is the following, okay? Chapters 21, 22, you can see very straightforward, okay? Very straightforward. 23 becomes the game. And so 23, which is going to be hormonal control and showing you how to play the game, will be mostly today. All we have left is chapter 26, which is sex or whatever it's called. For some reason I think of sex. But really when we're talking about the chapter, we're just going to continue what we're doing in 23. We're going to talk hormonal control of the sex hormones and then talk a little about some feedback loops involving female reproduction. So it's really, even if you look at it now, it's like a half-hour lecture. So on Monday, the whole lecture, even if we review some, shouldn't be more than 45 minutes at the most, which means then we have time to review. And by review, I don't need to write these first two tables, right? It's simply really, can you do those extra questions? And so because that's what's going to be on the test a week from today. Your last exam, unless you're going to take the cumulative final, your last exam is 1 week from today. That's the last time you're going to see me, okay? You won't see me for the cumulative. Someone else is going to do that if you take it. How many people, again, are going to take the cumulative, maybe? Okay, it's a maybe. It's baby's fine. I'll have enough. But I won't be here. So next Wednesday, last time you're going to see me, we're going to have the test. So you want to look over those extra questions over the weekend and make sure you get chapter 23 as best as you can. By the end of Monday, you definitely want to have it because you're going to take the test on Wednesday. It's 50 multiple choice questions. Actually, both those tests are. No essay questions at all. I put on, as everyone should have got the email, I originally had the extra questions and I didn't put any multiple choice really. I put on one that has 5 or 6 multiple choice questions. And I think those are almost, either they're exactly on the test or some similar ones are on the test, which means know how to do those. You're going to get those on the test. Do you question?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I know that the last test is Scantron only. When did you say you'll post those on Blackboard?
They'll be over before I leave. So.
Well, like, are you leaving the next day or Thursday? Or
Probably.
Friday? It's Thursday.
Yeah. I would almost imagine almost for sure I'll have it Thursday for sure because I'm just going to run the Scantrons, figure out any curve and put them in, and so everyone should know by Thursday what your grade is if you do nothing else, okay? And then it's up to you to decide whether it might be worth to take the cumulative. Again, the cumulative will replace your lowest grade. If you do worse on the cumulative, it's like you never took the cumulative. So it's only, you have to figure, if you got an 80 and you're trying to get 100 or something, that's going to be really hard. If you got a 50 and now you're getting, a lot of people have done this, now you're getting 80s or all that stuff because that first test, or one test was just, blew it, then it's worth it. Because maybe you can get 10 or 15 more points. If you're 10 or 15 points away from your grade and you've had a bad one, take the cumulative. It's hard. It's only over the first 4 tests. I don't say only, but it's not over this last material. But if you've improved as you've gone, there's a good chance that you can at least improve that score. I mean, I've had Lynn got an A on the last one, which you can see if you've dealt with Lynn, she's pretty on it after once she gets going on it. And so very few people have got an A on that test. But I've had people move up from D's to C's, and I've had a lot of B's on the test, so it's possible. Wait, let's get a
Is
question.
there a study guide at least for that?
Yeah, you look at all the study guides. It's the main things from the test. And again, I have the test over there, but we don't have a lot of opportunity to see it. But you can look at them. But there's it's some main concepts, all multiple choice from the first 4 exams. So it's not that easy. But again, I've had people do it. So.
Sorry, last question. I was just wondering, what time the test is on? Is it this class period on the last Monday of the 16th or whatever?
Yes.
So it'll be 5:20.
Yeah, and again, I'll tell her it's going to be a real nice lady, Susie, who teaches a lot of general bio here. I'll tell her, they can have as much time as they want. You won't care, and so, but it's kind of one of those things that you know it or you don't type of thing. So, but it will be the same time. Chapter 23. Oh, I'm sorry. Too late. Okay, this is the important chapter. Everybody wake up and look at that guy. and say, I don't want to be him. Don't erase this. So, endocrine control. And really, let's look at this slide for a second. What's nice about this chapter is the following. The first day, when you said, who is this guy? I'm introducing all the different systems. And I said, remember I'm up here, I'm like, there are two systems at the top that control all of them. The nervous system and the endocrine system. The nervous system is fast. The endocrine system is slower but long-lasting. So now we're going back to that. We're coordinating those systems and showing how they're going to work together. You can see already, we've talked about the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the link, is the major link between these two systems. And we really start to see it as we go through this stuff today. And we're going to see that the hypothalamus is going to control the master gland, the pituitary gland. And we're literally going to have examples, and I'll actually put it right up here because we're going to be filling this in which we're going to show how the hypothalamus is controlling the pituitary. So this is nervous system. I guess I'll spell it out. Controlling the endocrine system, in this case, pituitary gland. The pituitary gland we're going to see is going to release hormones that affect some target glands and tissues. This is like the backbone of what this chapter is going to be about. We're going to show you how this process works and is controlled. So this is the major network here. We have the hypothalamus, a part of the brain, going to be controlling the pituitary, that's hormone, the master hormone gland, and then that's going to control all these other, hormonal glands and tissues. And we're going to just give specific examples. Here's the backbone of this. So, we're not going to talk much about the posterior pituitary, but except for basically maybe this slide here. So, the posterior pituitary, we have the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary. These are going to be producing and releasing two hormones. Okay? ADH and oxytocin. Now, if you look at this, okay, we have the hypothalamus making these and basically releasing these substances directly into the posterior pituitary and then into the blood. And so when you have a system like this, in which you have a neuron then basically releasing it, this is called a neurohormone because it's neural because it's being released by the nerve here, but it goes into the blood, which makes it a hormone. So ADH and oxytocin are neural hormones. They're not just called hormones. Okay? Again, they're made by nerves, but then they're not like going across the synapse or anything. They're released into blood. Which is like a hormone. And what do they do? Well, we know what ADH do, and you don't want to actually forget what ADH does. And actually, there's some carryover in this chapter from the kidney. What does ADH do?
Keeps in water.
Reabsorbs water, okay? And so you can't forget that. Now, oxytocin is also the second one that's released. Oxytocin says mammary glands, uterine muscle. These are going to be involved in what we talk about Monday. So this will be involved in childbirth and breastfeeding, okay? My last slide of the course is breastfeeding, which is just weird to me, because I have 3 of these courses on breastfeeding. It's a big breastfeeding day. And I don't really feel comfortable on those last slides, and usually there's going to be like people, how about this about breastfeeding? And I'm like, no. But anyway, it is the last slide of the course. So we'll talk about that next Monday, okay? Now, here's the key, and you're not memorizing this at all. This is, again, what we're going to do. When we talk about the anterior pituitary, now we're going to be doing this. And this is kind of, let's actually get more specific here. For the hypothalamus, going to the anterior pituitary, ANT. It's not a nerve here. It's actually, the hypothalamus is going to make something, okay, we're going to show you what they make, that is released in going to the anterior pituitary through the blood. And these are specific portal, blood vessels called the portal vessels. Okay? They're going to stimulate the anterior pituitary to release various things. Okay? That we're going to cover. Don't memorize this table, it's crazy. Okay? Then they're going to affect different target tissues, and they're obviously going to have these effects. We're going to talk about 6 of these. Okay? And so what we're going to talk about today, the first one will be this idea of this hormone, ACTH. It's going to control cortisol production. Don't even write this down. Let's just look at this. That's going to be the first one we do. We're going to talk about thyroid. We're going to talk about making of thyroid hormones in this chapter. And a tiny bit, but not that much, talk about growth hormone. The next chapter, Monday, we're going to, again, remember we're talking, this part of this whole process for, sex stuff. Okay? You think I'm really good at this last chapter. But, so we're going to talk about FSH and LH controlling testosterone, estrogen, sperm development, egg development. And we're also going to talk about, of course, mammary glands and prolactin, okay? So we're doing everything but FSH, basically. But this is the basic system. This is basically hormonal control of the body. It's basically through the hypothalamus, controlling the pituitary gland, and then what's released from the pituitary gland goes around and affects all the other endocrine glands. That's why pituitary is the master gland here. But there is a link between the nervous system and the endocrine system, which is the hypothalamus.
The growth hormones will deliver the GH.
Say it again?
Never mind. It just.
The
Yeah,
all,
it says growth hormones.
this is growth hormone,
okay,
yeah.
just
But again, we're gonna get specifically on it. Okay, so we're doing cortisol. Okay, and this is the key. Once you understand what we're doing in this, then the other ones will play the same game. First of all, we look at the adrenal gland. Let's look at it. Okay. Now, we've already talked about it before, but when we were talking about it before, we were talking about what's released from the medulla, sort of the inner part, and that were the catecholamines, which are fight or flight, epinephrine, norepinephrine.
Sympathetic.
But in this case, sympathetic was going along with this. This was the endocrine control, but it's releasing some of the same things. So, but this is releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, that's fine. Now we're talking the cortex. Now we're talking what does the cortex produce, and know all of these, because I'm not giving up aldosterone. So it produces aldosterone and the sex hormones and cortisol. So this is why we're revisiting this, because we're going to talk about first cortisol and later, next Monday, sex hormones. But don't forget aldosterone, and again, don't forget what aldosterone does.
What does it do?
What does it do? Promotes what?
Salt reabsorption.
Salt reabsorption.
Follow water.
Okay, and water will follow. Right? Yes. All right. You don't need to know the slide. This is showing different zones, but it's not for this class. Okay, let's go back 1 second. Another slide you don't have to know. I want you to remember, though, and I've said this back from the beginning, all these steroid hormones are derivatives of cholesterol. And so the idea of this, we start with cholesterol, and depending upon what hormones we're doing, all the ones that we're going to talk about basically do come from cholesterol. Progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, aldosterone, cortisol, they're all based upon different enzymes conversion of cholesterol. So you don't memorize this, that's just that. Now, look at this busy slide. And we're going to show you why I put that up again, besides the idea of review. Cortisol. It's a stress hormone. It's essential for life. Okay, you need cortisol. And look at the next 3 things. It's necessary for glucagon catecholamine activity. It responds to hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia. Okay? Glucagon. Where does this fall? Cortisol fits right in. It responds to hypoglycemia, just like the alpha islet cells. Not only does it respond, it's necessary for glucagon to work effectively. The other thing, too, that it says, it's not just glucagon, it's catecholamine epinephrine. Okay? Epinephrine is fight or flight. If you are becoming hypoglycemic, is that a stressful situation?
Yes.
Is that like running from a bear in a way? It's your survival. So actually, epinephrine goes down here too. Remember, doesn't epinephrine put some blood, stimulate the liver to put blood sugar so you're running away from a bear or whatever you're doing? So that's what this is doing, right? Increasing blood sugar. So really down at the bottom here, that's why there's a link between this chapter, last chapter, and this one. We actually have not just the whole glucagon idea that we talked about, but both epinephrine from the adrenal gland and cortisol. But cortisol basically makes these work effectively. Without that, they're not going to work effectively. And responds to the same thing. If you're hypoglycemic, your adrenal cortex is going to release cortisol. What does it promote? Lipolysis, gluconeogenesis, skeletal muscle breakdown. What's over here? Lipolysis, proteolysis, okay? Glycogenolysis, the breakdown of glycogen, okay? Gluconeogenesis, the making of glucose. It's right here. You have to look right up there. It's right here. So all of that for 1, 2, 3, 4, those first bullet points are just shown right here, and it makes some sense. All right? Very cool. Okay. The last two really involve sort of when you might receive cortisol clinically. And so it's an immunosuppressant, so that if you have an autoimmune disease that we have no idea of how to treat, we just treat the symptoms, because we haven't cured anything in like 70 years or something like that, or 100 years, I don't know what it is now. But we're not good at autoimmune diseases. If you have an autoimmune disease, yeah, it's not a great day for you, okay? Because all we can do is give you cortisol, and we're going to show you the effect of giving too much cortisol, and it's an immunosuppressant. You also might get it as an anti-inflammatory as well.
Sorry, good question. Isn't that what they put in people with arthritis? Like they can inject it in their. What did you just say it was?
Yeah. Well, I mean anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some have cortisol. You get cortisol shots, or you can get different drugs with cortisol.
Yeah, I have a friend who's like 30 and she has really bad arthritis already, and she has to get because it runs in her family, and she gets I think cortisol.
Right.
In her joints.
And see, you're gonna see the side effect of too much cortisol in a second too. The trouble with it is there's some you can actually get these syndromes that cause a lot of problems. From basically having this. Okay, here's the key, guys. Okay, here's the key. Now remember, when we're looking at these, we're going to have to know the acronym, but there's no essay, so you're going to just make sure that you associate the acronyms with these. And so we're doing cortisol. So now, this is the general idea, but now we have this idea that the target tissue is going to be the adrenal cortex. This is the most important one we're doing today. Because once you understand what we're doing from this, you'll get the rest. So, under stress, it says circadian rhythms. And what that means is, and how many people have heard of circadian rhythms? So a lot of us have heard of this. We know that throughout the day and night that we have, we don't keep all continuous levels of everything. It's not like temperature and different things, which pH in which we have to stay. Other things naturally fluctuate depending upon the day. And cortisol is one of those things. So during the day, it's up. During the night, it goes down. And so, how much cortisol you release is related to that rhythm. But either way, the idea is under those conditions, the hypothalamus releases CRH, which is corticotropin-releasing hormone. All of the ones from the hypothalamus, all 6 we'll talk about, all these are going to end in RH because it's releasing hormone. Remember, you're not going to have to know the name, and you just have to, you'll see when you're on the test, you just have to remember, that these are associated with this versus thyroid or something. It's not going to be that hard, you'll see. Now, in response to CRH going through the portal vessels to the anterior pituitary, it's going to stimulate from the anterior to pituitary the release of ACTH. ACTH. Again, adrenocorticotropic hormone.
So CRH releases ACT.
CRH travels via the portavessels to the anterior pituitary, causes the anterior pituitary to release ACTH.
Okay.
It's like a signal for it to do it. So this is released by the hypothalamus, this is released by the anterior pituitary. This goes to the adrenal cortex and causes it to produce and release cortisol. So here is the little triad here so far for cortisol control and production. You're going to have, under various stimuli, CRH produced by the hypothalamus. It travels through those portavessels to the anterior pituitary, causing ACTH release into the blood. It goes to the adrenal cortex and causes cortisol to be released.
ACTH goes to the adrenal cortex?
Yes.
Okay.
So the anterior pituitary releases it all the way through the bloodstream. And its target tissue is the adrenal cortex. Therefore, in fact, you can see it up here even better, right? Hypothalamus releasing CRH. It travels through those vessels to the anterior pituitary. It releases ACTH. It travels through the blood to the adrenal cortex, causing it to release cortisol. And then you have all of these effects. You're not memorizing this because we just talked about all those.
So ACT, I'm so sorry, I'm pretty sure someone asked this, I was just writing. ACTH goes to the adrenal cortex, which then goes to cortisol, is that how?
Which causes the release of cortisol.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Now, go ahead.
It travels through the portavessels also?
No, because we've already did that. Portavessels are only the vessels right here, from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. Everything else travels through the entire bloodstream,
Oh, okay.
okay? And then hits, but the adrenal cortex is its target. We need to control this. This is sort of the key. The key is, and we'll show it here, that we don't want to keep making more cortisol going out of control. So as we produce cortisol, there's a negative feedback to the hypothalamus saying, okay, we have enough, let's start decreasing this. There's also a negative feedback to the anterior pituitary. So as cortisol levels go up, they're going to inhibit these productions, which will then inhibit that, okay? The typical homeostatic idea, but this is how we're drawing it here. I put this on the first test, and just to show you that you could apply negative feedback in that kind of system. I put one of these on there, maybe the thyroid one, but it doesn't matter. So the idea is the final product inhibit the ones before to control things. So you have CRH controlling, ACTH controlling cortisol. Cortisol comes back, and therefore, as negative feedback, decreases those so we don't keep making too much. Are you ready for the game? It's called the pathology game. So, I'm going to put something up here first. That what we're going to do is the following. There's like 6 scenarios we're going to sort of play with, but you don't have to. It's another one of those things where you're not memorizing. You're going to understand. We're going to talk about what if there's a problem here in which we have too much or too little of this hormone or any hormone, and we're going to show you 6 different scenarios. We're going to talk if there's a tumor, okay, in one of these places, and you want to think for this: if you have an endocrine tumor. The following 2 bullet points are going to apply. You're going to have an overproduction. These are not like malignant cancer. These are just non-malignant benign tumors, but it causes a problem. An overproduction of whatever hormone it is. Okay? Second fact, it does not respond to negative feedback because it is a tumor. Okay? So, does not respond. Not. And this is going to make sense as we put examples, but I want to put this first. Does not respond to negative feedback. Again, just write this, and it should become more apparent when we do it. So what we're going to show you is, what if you have a tumor in the portion of the hypothalamus? Or what if you have a tumor in the anterior pituitary? Or what if you have it in the adrenal cortex? we're going to be able to diagnose what the problem is based upon these levels, and we're going to play that. So those are 3 of the 6. Tumor, tumor, tumor. But the other aspect of it is, what if there is destruction of tissue of one of those places? Well, the corresponding 2 bullet points would be, we're going to have an underproduction of the hormone because the tissue is being destroyed, and it does not respond to stimulation. It does not respond to positive stimulation because there's nothing, or it's a decreased amount to respond. So we can destroy, destroy, destroy. Now we're going to be able to know, based upon the levels of these hormones, what the problem is. That's the game. And here's how we play it. So the first thing we're going to look at is hypercortisolism, too much cortisol. And you want to associate the name Cushing syndrome with this. Okay? So Cushing is sort of what you have too much cortisol. But if you look at this, you can have a pituitary tumor, adrenal tumor, or excessive cortisol treatment. If you're under chronic cortisol treatment, which is what you were saying your friend was, they have to really watch that. And again, I don't have all the symptoms of Cushing syndrome. Hopefully it won't be looking like that. Okay, that's looked pretty bad. Okay.
Is it the stomach?
Yeah, that's the stomach. It's.
Well, I know it's the stomach, but I'm saying, is it his face or his stomach that has the problem?
Both of them. Okay, you get these excess fat deposits in these different places, protein breakdown. It's similar to some diabetes, types of things, basically. But anyway, I'm not going on too much of the symptomology. But okay, so you can have all this, so all these different things. But we're going to be able to figure out the problem without looking at that. Okay, this is how we're going to do it. Okay, first of all, you keep this up. You have to understand this basic system. We all understand it. Now I'm going to show it 2 different ways. I'm going to redraw it over here. CRH, ACTH, cortisol. Okay? Now, what I'm going to give us is, let's say, and we'll go over the reverse a little bit later, but let's say the person does have a pituitary tumor, anterior pituitary tumor. Okay? So at this time I'm giving it to you. Next time, or another time, I'm going to actually give you the levels of the hormones and go backwards. But let's look at this. Now, if the person has this, they're going to have a particular profile, and we can figure it out. We don't have to memorize it. So let's start at where the problem is, which is the anterior pituitary, right? So we're looking at ACTH levels. Okay, based upon what we have next to it, do you think we're going to have high or low ACTH levels? High. Did you know that before? Maybe not. That's why I'm telling you. The endocrine tumors, you have overproduction. So we're going to have high ACTH levels. Now, based upon how this works, what do we expect cortisol levels to be? High. This stimulates this. So these are higher than normal. What do you expect CRH levels to be? Low, right? So look at this. Cortisol does what? It's a negative feedback on CRH. We have more cortisol. That means it's even more negative, it has lower levels than normal because we have more cortisol. If we have excess cortisol, that negative feedback decreases CRH. Now, you would think, if things were right, this is another way to indicate, from this bullet point, CRH is saying don't, right? We're not making CRH, we shouldn't be making ACTH. But it's a tumor. It ignores negative feedback. So, we're trying to negative feedback these things, but ACTH is working alone because it is a tumor. That's why it's high and it's not responding to negative feedback. But CRH is fine, okay? CRH is responding to negative feedback. So an anterior pituitary tumor, the levels if you take these hormones will be this. They'll have high cortisol, okay, and they probably came in with symptoms of Cushing, but you didn't know where the problem was. But here you're like, you have these levels, you're like, the problem is maybe a tumor on the anterior pituitary. Now, let's say something different to show you the difference. Let's say it is a adrenal cortex tumor. I'm going to draw this again. CRH, ACTH, cortisol. Okay? So, if you have an adrenal cortex tumor, again, let's start wherever the problem is. If we know the problem, we want to start there, right? We don't start somewhere else. What do we expect cortisol levels to be? High, because of the tumor. Now notice, a patient came in and you didn't know. Because all you knew is they had symptoms of hypercortisolism. And in fact, they both have high cortisol. If we just had that, we would not have a clue. But let's finish this game. Okay? You have high cortisol. You expect CRH levels to be? You expect ACTH levels to be? See the difference? So, in this case, you know, these are the same. This is indicating the difference here, that you see the problem. The patient came in with symptoms of hypercortisolism. If you just took cortisol levels, you're like, yeah, they have hypercortisolism. But where is the problem? Well, if it looks like this, okay, low, high, and high, the problem is probably an anterior pituitary tumor. If it looks like this, see the difference? This is low, then it's probably an adrenal cortex tumor. Okay? So, and again, you could take the levels of these hormones. So literally by taking the levels of the three hormones, you could start to diagnose what the problem is or where the problem lies. Now, do you memorize this is this and this is this? It doesn't make sense to memorize any of these. Okay? There's 6 scenarios for each one. You have to start, again, it's the game. This is the game of this, you know, like we played the game with the 4 things for the kidney. This is the game for this. Basically, if you, and we're going to do the opposite now, we're going to do the tissue destruction, but basically, if you have a tumor or a tumor or a tumor, what is it going to do here? Okay? Yeah?
So every time you have a tumor, it's high cortisol?
No. Well, for this, yes, actually it will be.
Well, yeah, I meant not like
Yeah. But
and then
go ahead.
I'm a little lost. I don't understand why ACTH is high there and it's low there.
Because you follow it here. So if you have an adrenal pituitary tumor, high cortisol because that's producing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, oh, I'm sorry. It's an anterior pituitary tumor. We're starting here. You have high ACTH because it's an anterior pituitary tumor.
Oh, okay, I get it. You don't have to explain it.
Okay. But it really does take practice. I mean, it takes you doing, you're not looking at this. This is if you put these on note cards, well, you can do what you want. But I would be using your whiteboard and starting over and seeing if you're getting this. If you had a hypothalamus tumor, just to finish that off, you know, what would CRH levels be? And ACTH? And cortisol? High. Okay? So, you know, you can see that right away without even drawing it, right? But if not, you're going to practice this. Let's go to the opposite side, though, and we'll do the same game, by the way. But we're going to talk about hypocortisolism. So for hypocortisolism, it could be what? Destruction, destruction, or destruction. Right? You know, it's destruction. We don't know where, though. But Addison, we do want to know specific. Okay, so we have some names here to remember. Cushing's and Addison. Addison's is an autoimmune, again, destruction of the entire adrenal cortex, which, do not forget aldosterone. Okay, we're doing cortisol now, but didn't I say aldosterone was important too? Okay, so if you have Addison's disease, you are going to affect aldosterone levels. And affecting aldosterone levels affect what? What does aldosterone do?
Sodium.
Sodium. And what is that going to affect?
Blood pressure.
Thank you. Okay. So,
The Addison's is the actual hypercortisolism or is both?
Addison's creates hypocortisolism by destroying the adrenal cortex. But we're going to see there's other ways to do it.
The adrenal cortex.
Okay? I'm going to do this. CRH, ACTH, cortisol. Okay? And I'll do another one. CRH, ACTH, cortisol. Here's Addison's. Okay, we're going to play the game twice more, but the second one, I'm going to show you the other way you're going to be presented these problems. I can either give you the disease, remember this is all multiple choice, I can either give you the problem or disease, and you have to tell me in the answer what the levels of the hormones are, and I'll have up, down, up, you know how it works. So you still draw this next to it. Or I can actually give you the hormone levels, and you've got to diagnose where the problem is. And that's why we're going to do that one too. Those are the two things we can do. And on the extra questions already, I've even given you some examples of, a lot of examples to play with this. Because this is the thing. This last test is, conceptual, harder stuff. So let's just do Addison's. And again, when you have a disease, you start with where it affects it. So Addison's disease is affecting is it affecting the hypothalamus, the pituitary, or the adrenal cortex? It's destruction of the adrenal cortex. Cortisol levels, therefore, are? So if cortisol levels are below normal, and so we have hypocortisolism, what do we expect CRH levels to be? Because less negative feedback. ACTH levels to be? High. Okay? Because without cortisol, then these are going to be up. And it's going to be high for two reasons, this one, if that's the confusing one. Because if you have more CRH, it promotes production of ACTH. Plus, there's less negative feedback even here. So both of these levels will be high. If you have Addison's disease with hypocortisolism, because you don't have the final product, these other ones are high, because you have less negative feedback.
The one that's circled, wasn't that supposed to be Addison's?
No.
Oh, what is
This is going to be the next example of a problem.
Oh, up there that's circled, what is that?
That's going to be for what we're going to do now.
Oh, okay.
Okay? I just put up the two examples we're going to give. So just this one is the one we're just dealing with right now. Okay? So this is, again, if I give you the problem, okay, in this case we gave you Addison's, you'd have to determine these levels. And it's going to be in a multiple choice, but you probably, when I do it, I draw this right next to it, right? So, you saw the problem was here, because that's by definition, what it is. So that's low cortisol. Therefore, you should, if you start to get this game, you should realize that both of these would be high. Okay, if you don't get the game yet, that's why we're going to practice it. Now, but here, the second one, the one I circled here, is the other way I could give you the question. I could say, you have a patient, and to be honest, this is the real thing, right? You have a patient coming in, you don't know what the problem is. You just know they have too much or too little cortisol, and you're like, let's try to figure it out. You're going to basically take these levels, and from the levels, determine where the problem is. That's why this is sort of clinically cool, okay? Because you're like, okay, you have low cortisol, what got destroyed? Is it the hypothalamus, the pituitary, or is it the adrenal cortex? Well, boom, you take those values. So when I give you those, which I'll give you, the first thing to do is probably fill them in, okay? So it's high CRH, low ACTH, and low cortisol. You're just transposing that into this figure. You don't have to. Some people can look at that again. There are Rain Men in the audience. They're like, oh yeah, that's that. Okay, well, that's fine. But for me, I'm not Rain Man, okay? I have to put these down and actually then work it out the same way. So, what on that? Don't start guessing, okay? Now, so what you do is you take a drink, and you're like, okay. Now you can start anywhere, but let's just start at the bottom, okay? So what we want to see is, what should be versus what we have. So we have low cortisol, and so we have hypocortisolism. Now again, we kind of go up. We expect to have, if you have low cortisol, you expect to have what CRH? And we do. Hypothalamus seems okay. You expect to have what ACTH? We've seen the problem. The problem with this is destruction of anterior pituitary. Okay? And you don't have to start at the bottom, but I usually just start kind of at the bottom. And as long as you understand negative feedback, if you've got too much of the product, you expect that to be lower. If you don't have enough, you expect these to be higher. And again, you can see it again, just like we did before, the difference is, these are the same. In this case, this is different. Okay? If we had destruction, or if we had, let's just put it this way, or let's just do it the other way. We have low CRH, low ACTH, low cortisol, even though a lot of you are like, yeah, I kind of know the answer, but some we don't. Low, low, low. You get a patient, you take their blood sample, they have lower than normal CRH, ACTH, and cortisol. Low, low, low. Okay, where do you want to start? Let's start at the bottom. You have low cortisol, you expect what for CRH? Do we have a problem there? Destruction of the hypothalamus. And if you're not making this, you're not making this. Okay? So, low, low, low. Or if I gave you low, 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 you would say destruction of the hypothalamus. Okay? So either way, again, there's six. We actually just put all three scenarios here of the destruction one, right? We had destruction, destruction, destruction. But you don't want to memorize the arrows. I mean, that makes no sense because we've got 4 more hormones to do this with. But every other we're going to do with, and we'll do the thyroid next, it's the same thing. We're going to have just different letters here. It's the same idea that things operate by negative feedback, and you just have to play with what if there's a tumor or a tumor or a tumor, destruction, destruction, or destruction. 6 scenarios. But if once you get the game, then, and again, I already know you guys can get this game. If you've got the kidney game, okay, and you've got the blood pressure game, okay, then you can definitely get this game. But you're tired, and it's really hard, and it's a week from today, so it makes that stressful versus, not.
For the previous example that we did with the high CRH, low ACTH, and then low cortisol, that means destruction of the anterior pituitary, is that what?
Yes. Now, note, choice C, destruction of the posterior pituitary. Would that be right? No. You think that's on my test? Yeah. Okay? So just remember, that all of these are the anterior pituitary. The only posterior pituitary hormones are ADH and oxytocin, which we'll talk about next time. Okay, take 3 minutes and think about this question, and then we're going to go on the thyroid hormone, which we won't play as extensively, but you'll see the same system here. But I'm gonna take a drink and think about, and you only have to think about one. Let's just say this: hypo. When you have hypocortisolism, do you think you're going to have too much glucose, hyperglycemia, or hypoglycemia? Think about that. Okay, and I'll take a drink. What do I do with my drink? by thinking I can erase this. So I erased part of this. So let me redraw.
Knock my glasses off.
Okay, so again, the hyper, hypo, they're going to be the opposite effect. Let's say hypo. Okay, you have hypocortisolism. Maybe you have Addison's disease. So you've got Addison's disease, you have hypocortisolism, and it's going to affect your blood glucose levels. They're either going to be higher than normal or lower than normal unless we correct it. What do we think? How many people say it will be that if you have hypocortisolism, okay, let's even put Addison's so we keep remembering the name associated with some of these. Now looking at glucose levels, how many people say that the glucose levels are going to be higher than normal? How many lower than normal?
How many don't know?
How many are going to find out? Okay, so again, the way to think of this is cortisol normally is used to do what? To glucose. Like glucagon, and what is glucagon doing to blood glucose levels?
It's
Raising them. If you don't have cortisol, are you going to be able to do that?
No.
Therefore, you will be
Hypoglycemic.
hypoglycemic. Okay? So most people got that right. Does that sort of make sense? Again, when you have a question like that, you go to your figure, right, or go to your mind. That's how I want you to do this. Hopefully you kind of get that by now. Because if that were just on the test, that we didn't even do this, you'd be like, what do I do? But most of you should be maybe now okay. It's going to refer to something that we've probably been doing, cortisol. Cortisol normally helps to raise blood glucose. It's not working, therefore blood glucose is not being raised.
How did you say it did that?
Well, we didn't go into all the specifics actually of it, but it's going to
It's like
basically,
back to where it needs to be.
yeah,
like in
exactly.
that
It's
example.
doing the same thing and helping this do all these processes to bring it back up. But, if it's not there or if it's decreased, it's not going to work effectively. If you have too much, what's it going to do? It's going to overshoot the mark and you have hyperglycemia. Does that make sense? Does everyone see how, again, that's how you want to reason these questions, even if you hadn't seen that before. And again, a lot of you actually got it in, of course, I mean, I did it real fast. I think, other people, you don't just try to guess. You literally go to what you've been drawing on your whiteboard or you draw on your paper. You know this, you say, where is cortisol related to sugar? Here it's related to sugar. Okay, does that make sense? That's how to do these multiple choice questions. Okay, you're going to be doing them beyond my class. And I hope through my torture that you're able to do them better. I'm not really doing it just to torture you. I don't go home and tell my wife, yeah, that was a really hard test. I actually don't like when you don't do well on the test. It freaks me out. I'm like, oh, I'm a horrible teacher, So I actually like the last test, you guys aced it. I've never had that high of a percentage on a test. Okay, from a class. So the other classes I was like, oh, they do 40%, and that was really good, and you guys have been a little down, to be honest. And I think it's because you're just sort of not studying quite as well up to your potential when you're doing all this stuff. And I know you had more potential, and somehow I got you guys to do it, and all of a sudden, boom, yes, that's right, okay? Probably all of you could have got 2/3 A's in the whole thing, the whole course. But anyway, I was really excited about that. It was great. It was so cool. Anyway, so hopefully we'll do the same on this test. Next one. And this is the other major one that we do. And again, I'll probably continue, after the time, just to finish the chapter up. But if you leave, you're not going to miss anything. We'll make sure, that because actually the other things, we'll actually begin the next time with some of the other stuff too. But a lot of people want to stay and kind of get as much material as they can today for the weekend. Go ahead and stay. But this is the other big one. Okay, then it's not going to be as much on the end of the chapter anyway. Thyroid. Okay, so we're doing we did cortisol. We're doing the thyroid hormones. First couple slides just introduce it. So the first slide is indicating the following, and we're going to see why. When we're talking about the thyroid hormones, we're looking at the thyroid gland. There's a couple different cell types. We're talking about the follicular cells. The C cells are going to be used for calcium control, which is the fourth thing in the chapter, which we won't do today in class per se, but we'll see it. So it's the follicular cells. Okay? Now, the hormones, the thyroid hormones are T3 and T4. And they're made of the amino acid tyrosine and iodine, which we get in our diet. T4 has 4 iodines, T3, 3. The other thing I want us to know, so these are the little factoids, T3 is more active than T4, 3 to 5 times. Now, okay, I'm skipping that for a second, and I'll show you why. Here's our guy. I already started to put it up. It's the same idea, that the hypothalamus controlling the anterior pituitary, controlling the thyroid gland, and particularly the follicular cells. So, under, it's a tonic release and things can control it. That when we want to make this thing, that the hypothalamus is going to make and release TRH. See, these are all RH. That's going to go through the portal vessels to the anterior pituitary, which will then make TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, TSH is going to bind, and I'll see why I'm doing this, to these receptors on the follicular cells. Okay? TSH binds to its receptors on the follicular cells, and that will create T3 and T4. So it's TRH to TSH to the follicular cells, and then you have T3, T4, which are the thyroid hormones.
Is that an M?
Is that a receptor?
No, that's supposed to be my
okay.
picture of a receptor.
So TSH, it needs the receptor in order to make T3 and T4. It cannot make it without that receptor.
Yes. The only way this is going to work is if TSH binds to its receptor, and it's going to stimulate the production of T3, T4. In return, what do you think is going to happen as far as feedback? Negative feedback to both. Nothing's different but the name, so to speak. Okay? Hypothalamus controlling anterior pituitary, controlling the target, and it's the thyroid. It just said it's particular cells of it. Okay? Now, when we do the problems here, I'm only going to talk about a couple problems, and what I want to talk about are goiters. Okay, that first guy had one. He had all kinds of problems, didn't he? On the first picture, she's not really feeling good either. There's a goiter. Now, what's cool about goiters?
You listen to bio. They use the same exact picture.
What, really?
Yeah, bio 107.
Maybe that's where I got it, but I don't know. Probably so. That actually
Can you
is.
just call goiters cool?
What? Yeah, what's cool about goiters, okay, thanks for reminding me where I was, is that you would think, okay, goiter, hyperthyroidism, right? Too much, hyperthyroidism. Hypothyroidism can always also cause goiters. Because what we're going to see is, and this is why I put this slide up, let's look, we're not going to memorize these. We're looking at what these follicular cells have to do to make T3, T4. Well, we've got to use all these transporters. We've got to get iodine in. We're combining with thyroglobulin. We're putting in this colloid mess. We're going back out, and we're releasing it. It's a lot of work. Do you agree it's a lot of work for these follicular cells? Okay. So the idea of a goiter is, it doesn't matter how much T3, T4 is, are we overworking these follicular cells? Are we overstimulating the follicular cells? That's going to be the key. It's not necessarily the hormone levels. What's going to illustrate that is this slide here. Okay, so we're going to, you can see it's arranged the same way, except it's got the organs next to it. So we're going to show you that you can have hypothyroidism to have a goiter or hyper. And these are just two examples of it. But you're going to see the key is not whether you're making T3 and T4. Here you're making lower, here higher. You both have goiters. It's going to be this stimulation of these follicular cells in which it's trying to go through that whole process and enlarging. That's what the goiter is. It's overstimulation of these follicular cells. So, let's look at both of those. Let's look at the first one. If you don't have enough iodine in your diet, probably not making much T3, T4, are we? So, that's going to stimulate the hypothalamus to release TRH. That's going to go to the anterior pituitary and say, we're going to make TSH. And so, TSH is going to hit these follicular cells and say, make T3, T4. Can it do it? No iodine. So that means, so in this case, this is basically low. And if we're not making it, we're not having negative feedback, right? So what's TRH going to be?
High.
What's TSH going to be?
High.
So TSH is going to keep hitting it. Boom, boom. Can it make it? No, right? It doesn't have iodine. What's going to happen? Higher. Boom, boom, boom. So it's the overstimulation of that's going to cause the goiter. We have low levels of the thyroid hormones. You have hypothyroidism, but that's not why you have a goiter. It's not the T3, T4. It's that we're overstimulating those follicular cells, and it's trying to do it by doing all these steps, and it just can't. It's just not making T3, T4. But it's going to be basically making all these other proteins and all these other enzymes, and basically enlarging because of that. It's overstimulation of the follicular cells in that case. Now, the second one. Now, this is just one way we can have hyperthyroidism. We could do the tumor, okay? But in this case, it's something that I want us to know, a specific one called Graves' disease. And Graves' disease is an autoimmune disease. So, because this is the last thing we have to say right now, we'll take a break, and some people can leave. Graves' disease, this is the major concepts of the chapter, these two. So Graves' disease is an autoimmune disease, but what's cool about Graves' disease? I know I shouldn't say. What's cool about it? Does anybody know anybody with Graves' disease? Because it's sort of a common. You do. It's not you, is it?
No.
Good. Okay. Because I can say stand up and tell how bad autoimmune disease are, but So she probably have symptoms of hyperthyroidism, you would think, if this is all right. But if they're not, let me know. I know you don't want to probe too much, okay? I told you what you in class. No, I mean, he wants you to come in.
Is the same as an overactive thyroid?
It's hyperthyroidism means we're producing too much of the thyroid hormones. So it's always basically an overactive thyroid, okay? But here's how this works. So when you have an autoimmune disease, most times you're destroying tissue, like we did with type 1 diabetes. This is different. You're going to make immunoglobulins, you're making antibodies that are recognizing your own tissue, which is why it's autoimmune, but instead of destroying it, it's stimulating it. And so basically, now you have you're making thyroid stimulating hormones. And these are acting like a TSH agonist, which means it acts like TSH. So what it's doing is it's hitting the follicular cells and saying, do your work, make T3, T4. And it says, okay. It goes back, the feedback loop works, right? If you have high T3, T4, you expect TRH levels to be?
High.
Low.
Oh.
Negative feedback, right? We have a lot of this now. We expect TSH levels to be low. And so TSH is saying, fine, I'm not going to hit you. Okay, I get the idea. But do the TSIs, do the thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins respond to negative feedback? No. So they're going to keep stimulating this and make more and more, and it's the stimulation of this that causes the goiter. Okay? Remember, the goiter is not too much T3, T4. That has not anything necessarily to do with it. It's how much are we stimulating these cells. In this case, we're stimulating directly with TSH. In this case, we got that down, but we're stimulating it with these, with this autoimmune response. Your antibodies actually bind to the receptors and stimulate the production.
I'm going to assume that's deadly, goiters, if they get out of control.
Well, yeah, sure. Your roommate doesn't have a goiter, does he? No. Take a picture. No, I'm sorry. Here's my roommate's goiter. It's not funny at all, actually. Well, I joke about a lot of things, but I'm not, I take it life seriously, believe me, okay? Seriously. But I enjoy teaching, biology, what can I say? Okay?
So, to sum that up, can we just say, like, Graves' disease is the overstimulation by TSI?
Sure.
Okay.
But you have to understand.
On the follicular cells.
Yeah, on the follicular cells.
Yeah.
Does everyone sort of get, and again, when you play the game otherwise, you still can play the game, of, destruction, 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 or tumor, tumor, tumor. It's the same game. But these are two examples specifically of how we can get, actually goiters from it, even though we have low or high, T3, T4 levels. So it's two good examples of it. Plus, there are two different examples than the idea of destruction and tumor, right? So we have lack of iodine and we have Graves' disease. So you have to know both of those as well. But because everyone's, again, the game, is there's growth hormone, which I'll do it after the break if people want to stay. Guess what? It's the same thing, right? It's going to be ... The next chapter, which is Monday on sex hormones, it's going to be gonadotropin-releasing hormone affecting TSH and luteinizing hormone. How many people have heard of LH? Almost all women know these hormones, okay, more than men. And then it affects, sperm production, egg production, estrogen, testosterone. But it's the same idea, and you do the same thing: tumor, 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 destruction. There's nothing different about it, okay? And that's the rest of the course, okay? So, take 5, 6, 7 minutes and leave if you want. What I'll do for everybody else is just, it's another half hour or so of the chapter. I'll go ahead and all we have left is growth hormone, which is really just a couple minutes, because I don't go into the details, I just show it to you. And then calcium control, which actually, I summarized it in a figure like this, and that's the only other thing in the chapter. So if you want to stay for that, wait to me, right? Somebody's waiting, I don't know who
Just wait. So for people who leave, are you going to go over it again on Monday?
Sure.
Okay.
It's just that, some people want it already to study for, so I'll be here. Also, I'll stay, and even after that, we can go over this more closely. If you want to go to the lab and look at those other tests, if you're taking the cumulative, although I concentrate on this test, we do that as well.
So, no, never mind. This one. Test next Wednesday.
Gotta get going, but
That's great. Yeah.
Sorry, we're not like going to front.
What do you mean? What do you say? Well, by a different condition it will, yeah. I mean, you can do the whole destruction, tumor, and you have different games, right?
No, that was nice.